Trust me, I'm naked. Don't need to ask yourself. What I'm going to do here is just talk about why I believe something firmly, and I intend on being the first person ever to make money off of this belief, because I think and I'll explain why I think I will be able to make money. But what I plan on doing here is just tell you the history that led up to right now. In 2010, I had moved to South Korea to teach English as a last resort, a ditch effort to find myself. And I think a lot of people shares the sentiment. Up to that point, I had worked in a variety of Japanese companies, trying to establish myself as a foreign, as the Japanese put it, salary man, or a foreign individual who works as a Japanese, what's the word called? Office worker? What's the word called? Someone that salaried worker, just anyone. So I worked for a variety of different companies, I worked for a spring manufacturing company. I worked for a travel agency. I worked for a company that sells books, company that makes pastries, like quite the spectrum. But I was doing it all just to make use of my Japanese, which I was at that point a fluent in. I would say I'm still pretty close to that, but not as fluent as I was then. But I had dedicated a lot of effort to get to that point, and so I thought, well, I got to make use of it. Well, it turns out that people speaking a second language is useless in and of itself, unless you're going to be like a translator in terms of making money. You can only make money, you can only live a sustainable life using your second language if you also have another skill to complement it with, which makes perfect sense. You wouldn't, whatever your native language is, you would never imagine people paying you just to speak it. But for some reason in my ignorant brain, I didn't know that. I went to job fairs and I thought just being able to speak Japanese fluently was enough for me to get jobs. And the thing is, it was. That's the crazy thing, is it was, but it wasn't enough for me to keep the jobs. Anyways, man, I'm just like getting emotional. I'm just talking about it. This effort brought me to Korea. And this failure brought me to Korea. I had never taught English. I had never taught anything. I had no idea about teaching whatsoever. So it was a brand new environment, brand new everything, skill that I was trying to develop. And turned out I liked it. I liked teaching a lot, and I was really good at it. The majority of the students at the first school that I taught at, they would wait after class to hang out with me. It felt really cool. It was like this world where my imagination was able to run wild, right? I could entertain the kids. I was a good entertainer, is what I just. I would adopt different roles and play different characters to keep the students interested. Create all sorts of games. It was fun for about a year. But then at about the year and a half mark, I started to realize that everything I was doing in the classroom would stay in the classroom in that moment. And by the next time I'd meet the kids, it was as if I had not done nothing. Yeah, they liked being around me, but in terms of learning, in terms of their retention, it was as if I did nothing. And so what I realized was that they weren't learning. They were just enjoying me. And so as long as I was in the classroom, outsiders could believe they were learning, but it was nothing. And that really annoyed me because it wasn't natural and it wasn't sustainable. Because there's nothing natural and sustainable about causing an individual to only be able to learn if there's a teacher present, one, okay, but then on top of that, if the teacher was entertaining, was engaging. So that doesn't make any sense in reality. There's no such thing as a teacher in reality. There's just people that are good at something that you have to learn from. But there's no such thing as a teacher who teaches you in reality. You take a person outside of a classroom and every form of reality that they become accustomed to in the classroom disappears. So that just drove me crazy. I had invested a year and a half of my life believing I was doing something good. And then for some reason that felt, now it wasn't even a failure, but that reality shock penetrated my heart much deeper than the failure I experienced of not being able to eke it out in a Japanese company. So the failure of discovering that the past 6 years of my life dedicated to learning Japanese may have been for nothing. For some reason, that failure, I didn't even care about it at this point. And so I knew something was important here. So I made it my life goal to figure out how to teach in a way that allowed students to not need to be taught. I know it sounds weird, but it makes perfect sense if you think about it. I wanted to teach in a way that allowed students to be able to learn from anybody, whether or not they were a teacher, which is what they're supposed to be able to do. If you think about an infant or a child, they don't rely on one specific teacher to pick up, say, their native language or to pick up the mannerisms that they need to function in society. These very, very important things, right? They don't rely on one specific teacher. They rely on everybody. Every single person they meet is a learning opportunity. And so clearly, I realized that whatever's happening in the classroom, whatever was believed to be truth in the classroom wasn't, because it didn't translate into society at all. The only trajectory in which it translated was you transitioned directly from, say, grade school to a university, and then directly from a university to a company. All those environments share the same quality of an authority figure who you are taught by, who is your teacher. So as long as you stayed in this path, you were good. But what percentage of people are able to do this in a sustainable way? But it doesn't even matter about that. It's not reality. If you, anywhere else in any other circumstance that isn't a school, a university, or a company, okay, nothing that happens in the classroom is of use. Not nothing, but the majority of what happens in the classroom is not of use. The only useful thing you gain from a classroom is the ability to get along with your peers. I'm talking about a thing that is able to translates directly into society. So but that's a skill that you can develop anywhere. You don't have to be in a classroom for that. So I was determined to solve this problem. And so I dedicated my life to solving it. And I'm not going to go through the details of what I did because honestly, I can't recall them. I can't recall them to a degree of specificity where I could actually tell you what happened. All I can say is, from that moment on, I worked for so many different educational institutions. And I increased my education to the Master's of Education level. I had previously had a bachelor, I had gotten a master's. All in an effort to figure out the solution. So I had started with elementary 5-year-olds to, from 5 to whatever is the graduating age of elementary students. And I developed ideas and strategies and conducted my own personal form of research to test these ideas. And they all made some progress, but then there was just a wall that I couldn't overcome. And so I'm thinking, maybe it's because their intellectual capacity was not to par. And so I thought, well, in order for me to really understand this, I got to teach older kids. And so then I quit those jobs and got jobs that's teaching middle school to high school age students. And it was the same thing. I was able to progress a little bit further, but still a wall. And so I'm like, well, okay, so maybe high school students, there's a cap there. Maybe, so I got to keep going. So eventually I ended up teaching at universities, and that's when I had to get the master's. So I ended up teaching at universities. And at the university, I was able to teach students from 18 all the way to 80, not 80, but 60, elderly level students. And it was fun. And that was about a 2-year period. That transpired in Japan. So in that time period, I had left Korea, got married, and moved to Japan. So about 2-year period, I was teaching 18 to 60-year-olds. And you can't really go further than that, right? And so I was forced to figure out, I no longer had the excuse that, it's because they were too old or too young, right? So I was forced to really cut through the fat and figure out what it really is that they need to do. What is the most important thing someone must do to ensure they are learning in a way that reflects reality? The most important thing, meaning if you don't do this, if you do anything but this, if you dedicate 100 hours doing something that is not this, you're not learning. I had to think of something that could qualify as that. Not think of it, I had to figure out what it was. And so it was a process of thinking of a variety of things, testing it, right? And what I came up with, and what believe to be the truth is if you are not able to use the thing you are learning to make new friends, to develop new relationships, you're not learning. And so the focus is not on the thing, but on the relationships it allows you to develop. So that's what I've discovered. Learning is about developing relationships, not about acquiring a skill. Acquiring a skill, acquiring information happens as a result of developing relationships. You take the relationship developmental aspect out, the skill won't be developed, the knowledge won't be acquired. And whatever skill or knowledge you do develop isn't transferable, isn't usable outside of, say, the classroom. So what I realized was, and so in the process of figuring this out, I had to use my classroom. I had to test it in my classroom. So I had to restructure what a classroom experience is so that I would be able to test how accurate this actually is. And just recently, the reason why I know this is true is because just less than a week ago, at one of the universities, or in this case, a college that I teach at, a teacher stopped me in the hallway. A Japanese teacher stopped me in the hallway and said, "This college and this college is structured quite similar to high schools, in that there's a homeroom teacher that the students have throughout the semester, and then it's like a college that prepares them for the university. So if they aren't able to get into the university, they usually typically go to this type of college. That's a whole other topic. Like, I've taught at university, and I realized that students at the university are less susceptible to this reality than students in this college for some reason. There's something about the brain being packed too much with information and skill that inhibits its ability to develop relationships. And I know for a fact that's not a shock to anyone listening to this. Anyways, this teacher stopped me in the hallway while I was going to class, and she said something that had never been said to me before. And then I confirmed that it had never been said to anybody else in this university ever, according to every other teacher's knowledge of themselves and everyone else. And this is what she said. She said, one of my students, his name is Jota, Jota said to me that he loves your class. And I'm like, okay. First off, no teachers had ever stopped me to say that. I had heard that through the grapevine that students like my class, but it had never been in this way. It's typically just through teacher evaluations and other students, right? But a teacher had never stopped. And I'm like, oh, well, why? And this is what confirmed that what I'm doing is the truth. He said that I am the only teacher he's ever met that treats him like a human, an adult, an actual person. That's it. That's exactly how he should feel if I am transmitting the truth. What is more human than developing relationships with other humans? There's nothing more human than that. It's not a human, it's not the epitome, the essence of humanity is not developing skills. It's not acquiring knowledge. It's not. And no one would argue with this. No one would argue. the epitome of humanity. To be a human is to have relationships with other humans. Everything else is secondary to that. No, everything else, all the skills and knowledge that you acquire happen as the result or happen to allow you to develop relationships. You take the focus off the relationships, you don't have anything anymore. And so when I heard, I knew I was on the right track. I knew I was doing the right thing. Now, I'm not going to go into detail on how I teach because that's what I'm doing in my other videos. All I wanted to say was what led me to come to this realization. There were many milestones along the way, but for some reason, none of them came up, which is a really interesting thing because if you think about it, what I think is the milestones that really led me to this moment, led me to this state that I'm in, were more or less failures. Really big ones too. So I guess to kind of recount them, I had been fired from a variety of educational institutions because I was teaching in a way that not looked down upon. It's not standard. But certain milestones, certain firings hurt a little bit more than others. I'd been fired from a lot of different schools, but there were two in particular that hurt because they were well-paying schools. They were, if I had stayed there, I would be set for life type of thing. Like they paid well enough that I wouldn't have to worry about money if I'd stayed there. One of them was a private elementary school in California, and the other one was a university here in Japan. They both paid me the most money I ever made, which isn't a lot, but the most money I ever made. And one of them, I wasn't fired from either of them. I was demoted, I guess you could say, or asked to leave. I wasn't fired. It was like, we don't like what you're doing. You don't have to continue working here next semester. And then I'd say, oh, but I want to fill my contract. And they're like, ugh, and they let me do it. So it wasn't like I was fired. The other one was, we're gonna demote you back to, say, substitute teacher or whatever. Just whatever the lower ranking in that hierarchy, right? So those were two things. Those were two big things. It was like, there were moments where I was like, if I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing, I'm not going to make as much money in the moment. But this is the thing. I have to believe that the statistical majority, because developing relationships cannot happen in a classroom in the way that I'm talking. So what I'm talking about is you are using the thing you are learning to develop new relationships or deepen current ones you already have. That can't happen in the classroom, and this is why. The only types of relationships you can develop in the classroom are ones with the teacher or ones with classmates. The relationships you develop with classmates, by definition, can't be developed with the thing you are learning because you both suck at that thing. So you can't use the thing to develop those relationships. So they are developed based on something else, something more basic than the thing you're learning. So for example, if you're in a classroom, if you're learning English, you run to Japanese students learning English, you can develop a relationship with your classmates, but what are you going to use to develop those relationships? You're not going to use English, you're going to use Japanese, right? Or you can develop a relationship with a teacher. But this is the problem with that. A teacher is one individual that has so much has spent so much time in the classroom that they don't represent reality. They're attuned to your inability to speak or inability to produce and use the skill, that they can actually read between the lines to a degree that is actually detrimental to your progress. They can understand what you're trying to say or what you're trying to do to a degree where you actually don't have to produce things that well to be understood. Therefore, the relationship you develop with the teacher doesn't allow you to transition into society as well as, say, developing the relationship with someone who isn't a teacher. I've never been able to explain this that well, actually. So it's not that it's bad to develop a relationship with a teacher. It's just that a relationship with a teacher is it's further away. What the effort needed to develop a relationship with a teacher is so distant from the effort needed to develop the relationship with just any individual who's good at the thing you're learning, that you could say that they're categorically almost different. Can't take it that far, but what I can say from experience is students never develop the type of relationship you need to be able to exist in society with teachers. Just can't do it. It's a hierarchical thing. It's actually forbidden in a sense. A relationship with a teacher is actually looked down upon. So it's like the structure doesn't even allow it. I should have just said that from the very beginning, but I tried to get all technical, and that's confusing as hell. I probably wasted your time. But the structure of, say, a university, a classroom, the cards are stacked against your ability to develop a relationship with a teacher. The relationship you can develop with a teacher is doomed to end as soon as you leave the classroom. And whatever you learned, whatever relationship building skills you developed aren't transferable, because you're not going to go into an environment. Reality isn't littered with teachers. It's littered with just regular people who don't know how to teach, who hate teaching, who wouldn't even are scoff at the idea of teaching. Yet you still have to develop you actually have to develop a relationship with them. And so what I had to do is force myself to believe and then structure my classroom around the idea that the skill in developing a relationship and the skill in learning a skill, so the traditional form of learning, which is heavily based on memorization and reading and rote practice, and the skill development relationship are categorically different. And so I had to restructure my classroom so that nothing was done in the classroom that superseded relationship building. And I can't say that I'm successful yet because I'm not making money. In other words, I don't have people coming to me specifically to learn this thing. But the fact that this student said this to his teacher and it impacted her enough to say it to me means I have been successful with at least one student. And that's all you need. That's really all you need to keep going.